Thank you everybody for tuning in from all over North Dakota and beyond. Looks like we have 70 people here on this Saturday morning, so that's super awesome. Thank you for joining us. And I just wanted to just get that warm welcome to everybody, and let's really get in and dive into our program, which everybody's here to hear about today. So as you all know, the North Dakota Legislature is still considering two different voucher type bills. And no matter what they call them, they're calling them education savings accounts, they're calling them scholarships, tax credits, whatever they call them, they are still taking money from public money, which could go to public schools, and funneling it to private institutions. So this morning, we're going to hear from some passionate advocates who are standing up for public education, not just here in this legislative space, but really every day of their life. And speaking out on the harmful voucher bills, really shining a light on what the actual impact is going to be on the people, the families, and the school systems here in North Dakota if these bills pass. Our featured speaker is Erin Oban, and just so you know, you're probably very familiar with Erin, but she's a lifelong North Dakotan. She's built her career around service to the state of North Dakota. She, as a public school teacher, as a state senator in our North Dakota legislature, and most recently as a state director for the USDA in rural development. So with deep roots in both education and in rural policy, she brings a very unique and very trusted perspective to the challenges and the opportunities that are facing North Dakota communities all across our state. So today, Erin continues her commitment to public service with North Dakotans for Public Schools. And this is a broad-based coalition working to protect and strengthen the promise of high-quality public education for every student in the state of North Dakota. Erin's going to be joined today with two powerful voices from the fight for public education, Sheila and Rick. They have both testified at the Capitol in opposition to these bills, and they'll be drawing on their own experiences to highlight the real impacts. I'll let Erin share a little bit more about the wonderful and incredible background of her guests today too, and the stories that they'll bring. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Erin. Please join us, Erin.
Well, thanks for the very kind introduction, Amy. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. And while Amy provided a little bit of my background, I don't make assumptions that anybody knows anything about me more than they would anybody else. But I do come into this conversation with kind of a diverse background and perspective. The only thing I will correct from what Amy shared in my bio is that I was actually a private school teacher. I was not a public school teacher. I did my student teaching, ironically, at the Youth Correctional Center. So that is a state school. For kiddos who have some very serious challenges and some experiences in their life that led them to the Youth Correctional Center. And then when I got my first full-time teaching job, I actually taught at a private school here in Bismarck. So that's part of, I think, the perspective I bring into this conversation about vouchers or education savings accounts. I think maybe the first thing we should do is just start with, like, what is a voucher? I think we talk about it a lot. Many of us probably think in our minds what that is, but essentially a voucher is a form, a check, or a coupon that's issued by the government that provides you with a credit or money to pay for a future purchase or expenditure. In this case, we are talking about taxpayer public money, the government issuing it to a certain group of individuals to pay for private school tuition in this case. And so whether you call it an education savings account or a voucher, it acts the same way. So it really doesn't matter, in my opinion, what we call it. For those of you who are following really closely this legislative session, as Amy said, I was actually the state director of USDA Rural Development up until January 20th. I was serving in the previous administration as a presidential appointee, and my time came to an end. And to some extent, I feel awfully lucky that I'm able to engage in this debate in the way that I can now, because when I served in the state Senate, cared so deeply about this issue. I served on the Senate Education Committee for 4 sessions, and this has been a topic of conversation, not just in North Dakota for the last many years, but across the country. And if we choose to learn from others' experiences, we can learn a lot about what happens when vouchers or ESAs are put into place in states that start funding with public dollars private education. So for the first time in our state's history, if these bills were to pass, that's what would happen. We would use state funds to support very directly the tuition for private education. This last session, there have been at least 7 bills introduced called school, kind of under the guise of school choice. School choice is also a very nice term. I support school choice. I'm guessing the folks who are joining me today support school choice. The question is whether or not you believe taxpayers should pay for your choice that you make when you opt not to use the public schools that are provided to you. In those 7 bills, 4 of them have been voucher or ESA bills, and there are 2 still alive: Senate Bill 2400 and House Bill 1540. The Senate just the other day, maybe 2 days ago, passed House Bill 1540, and that has a lot of momentum behind it. We are pretty concerned about the impacts of both of those bills, but specifically, just so you know what House Bill 1540 does. It would create an education savings account that could be accessed only by those families who opt to use private education, and based on your income levels, would give all families attending a private school anywhere from a range of a little over $1,100, no matter your family's income. So all families would get $1,100, all the way up to over $4,000 to help pay for private school tuition. Pretty significant fiscal note on that bill. So what is it going to cost? And as you are paying attention to what's happening in North Dakota, we have a lot of competing priorities to use the resources, the taxpayer funds that go into one pot. You will hear a lot of folks talk about how this does not take money away from public schools. When all the resources we get in terms of taxes go into one pot, whatever you're extracting from that pot, we only have so many to use. And so those dollars get divvied up in the ways the legislature determines. And this would cost $40 million, upwards of $40 million to implement, to staff, to have folks access those dollars, and at a time where our state is also determining property tax relief, behavioral health resources, what can they afford to pick up the tab for federal cuts that are happening. So this doesn't just occur in a bubble, and I think for us to recognize those impacts is really important. The House also has in its possession Senate Bill 2400. We have not heard much about that since they gave it an 11-3 do not pass recommendation out of Senate, or out of the House Education Committee. So an 11-3 do not pass. It's been a very interesting experience watching coalitions form. In this case, the homeschool community has really stood alongside the public school advocates, saying we don't want this money. We don't want any of these kinds of programs started in North Dakota. So as I got engaged in those hearings and was able to really pay close attention to the folks who were stepping up to advocate for continuing to support and strengthen our public schools, I got to hear from both Rick Deagle and Sheila Peterson. So I am going to provide you a little insight, although I think they're both transplants from South Dakota, perhaps. We are in the midst, really, of some North Dakota education royalty. So consider yourselves very lucky on this Saturday morning. Being joined, honestly, by 2 award-winning educators. They are both a couple of the most humble people, and they will hate being introduced with their awards. But Rick Deagle is North Dakota's 2025 Superintendent of the Year, and Sheila Peterson is North Dakota's 2024 Teacher of the Year. So in terms of just the incredible educators and leaders we have in public education, I'm joined by 2 of them, and invited them to come on and share with you the message they shared with legislators when they took time out of their schedules, when they took time out of their classrooms and out of their school buildings to come and visit with legislators about what why they oppose voucher bills, ESA bills, no matter the number, no matter what we call them. So if I can invite maybe Rick first to share. Rick is in his 38th year of education. 25 years have been spent as a superintendent. This is his 10th year serving as Kidder County's superintendent. And Rick, when you come off mute, why don't you let people know, just because not everybody's a Class B kid like I am, where Kidder County is. And he's also spent time working in the communities of Edgeley, North Dakota as a principal and superintendent as well. So in addition to being that superintendent in Kidder County and the 2025 Superintendent of the Year. He's apparently referred to as the godfather of Class B small schools in North Dakota. And again, as a kid who grew up in a Class B town, just deep appreciation for the folks who live and work really hard to sustain our rural communities across North Dakota. So Rick, would you share with the folks what you shared with the education committees when you testified against these bills?
Well, thank you, Erin. I really appreciate it. I've been very fortunate to work with some great people over the last 25 years as superintendent that make me look probably way better than I am, but I'm very fortunate. And really, what I shared with the committee and what I'll share with this group is that's what I've gotten to see over the last 25 years as a superintendent and 38 years in education is just that the incredible job that is being done every single day in our schools. And some of the things that I'm the most proud of and that I see the most that just take my breath away is sometimes dealing with our most difficult kids. Those kids, they deserve an education. They deserve to be loved. They deserve to be an opportunity to have as much success in society as possible. And those kiddos, we hire paras, even just in Kidder County, I have 8 one-to-one paras that work specifically with kids that whether it's behavioral, whether it's special needs, whether it's autism, just a variety of things. And what they do every day, I'm just amazed. I walk down the hall and I see how they're handling kids that may get physical or may have some challenges, and they are just absolute saints. And so I think my message was to the legislature was very simply, we take all these kids in. All you have to do is move into our district. If the parents live in our district, you're ours. And that's okay. That's good. We want you to be ours. But we need all the funds we can get to hire. My 8 paras is almost $300,000 a year that we spend on just the one-to-ones. I have more than that just to assist with my regular classroom teachers. If there are needs out there that we can't handle, and that happens in a Kidder County, we may have to work with the parents to try to have those kiddos attend a facility such as the Ann Carlson Center in Jamestown, or HIT and some other great facilities that we have in Bismarck. If it's a behavioral thing, we may end up having to have them attend school for a while at Beach, at the Home on the Range, or whatever that's called. All those are my expenses. The parents live in my district. And
Rick, can you make sure that that's clear? Because I have heard folks kind of claim that, yeah, public schools say they take all, but they can't serve all. So importantly, what happens in terms of funding that child's alternative route?
Yeah, there's 2 different routes. One is if the state gets involved, and that takes a lot of work with the parents, and that happens sometimes where maybe the state will pick up some of those costs. But I can 100% assure you that if we don't get as much parent buy-in, if we can't get the parents to work with us, we can then as a school just say, I can't change feeding tubes. There are just some needs here that are beyond my capability. And so we may end up having to have them go to the Ann Carlson. We pay for transportation from Kidder County to Jamestown and Jamestown to back every day. We provide transportation, and then we pay that tuition. I have to pay up to 4 times the average cost of education for that kiddo to go there, which is about a $60,000 bill for that kiddo. So there's just a lot of different, if you live in our district, we are going to serve you. That is our responsibility by law, and we take it very serious. And we feel like that is what we're going to do. So that's why the funding is so important, that everything I get. And when you start adding declining enrollment, which a lot of rural districts are experiencing now, to the per pupil payment being so high, and so therefore the funding for per kid is a big deal. When you start to couple that with declining enrollment, all of a sudden things get really tough, and then we have to decide what we're going to do. But serving special needs kids, because there's federal laws through through IEPs, we can't say, well, I'm sorry, we just can't afford that para. That's not an option. We are going to afford that para. And I'm sorry, a few years ago, I was looking at needing a speech teacher for speech impediments and things like that. Again, a federal requirement that we provide a speech teacher. If we couldn't find one, I was looking at teletherapy. I'm too old to think that, I don't know, and I know a lot of schools do it, but like, how do you teach a first grader to have him sit in front of a computer and teach him how to say his R's and L's and S's correctly? Doesn't matter, got to do it. That was going to cost me over $100,000. to do teletherapy for somebody, from somebody that's out of state to do that, but I have to provide that. And so that was my message to the legislature. Really quick, I'll try to go through. I think a lot of people, they just assume private schools and public schools are the same thing. Like there's no difference between those two. They all educate kids. How different can it be? I'll be honest, there's probably more differences between public and private education than there are similarities. And I'm not saying that private education is bad. It's not. There is a role for private education. And I have never once in my career spoke poorly about that shouldn't be an option for parents. My wife went to a private elementary school. Erin, you said you taught in one. That's great. But the differences simply are private schools are right now, and if they continue, and if they begin to get public money, they are not accountable to anything that they spend their money on. There's no transparency there. You can't attend their school board meetings. You can't publicly run for a private school board. I've had a lot of people say, I want to come to your school board meeting. What do you think their reply would be if I said, you can't come to our board meeting? We lock the doors. We are not going to allow our public to walk in and attend our public meetings. Our board meetings? I've had a lot of people say, can I see that teacher's file? I want a copy of it. I say, absolutely. We are open meetings, open records. A private school says, no, you cannot see those records. That's sealed behind my desk. There's open audits. You can see how we spend our money. Everything we spend money on, you can come in and take a look at it. Financial records, employees. We do our state testing. It's on Insights. Go look at it. Take a look at it. We will show. And then it breaks down our subcategories of EL kids that move into my district that may not speak a single word of English when they showed up. But we take them. I actually have a full-time EL teacher that also does some other things. I don't even have that many EL kids, but I have to provide them with special instruction when a kid moves into my district and doesn't speak a word of English. I think the other thing is last session, they passed a law saying we have to teach cybersecurity to all of our kids so that they don't get caught up in that. But private schools don't have to teach cybersecurity. They don't fall under those. And even the latest one, and then I'll stop my rant, and Sheila has way more important things to say than I do. But even the current one with the cell phone, we all recognize, and even in Kidder County, we go back and forth between, oh man, these kids are going to have cell phones for the rest of their lives. We need to teach them how to use them properly, not that they just don't exist. I can barely go to church without a cell phone going off. Adults need some training in that, but at the same time, we do understand that they are a distraction. So right now, we've all seen that there's going to be a law passed which may not allow kids to have cell phones during the day. But guess what? That doesn't, according to the Senate version, that doesn't apply to private schools. They don't need to worry about private, cell. And the statement was made, well, our private schools already have schools regarding cell phones. Well, that's kind of hurtful. So do we, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but it's really two different things that are not the same. And we aren't going to know how private schools spend one penny of the public monies that they get. And that will be the only place that the legislature provides money and says, don't need to worry about telling us how you're spending it. The county tells them, the city tells them, the EMS services tells them, the schools tell them, but we are going to carve out this thing saying, just take the money and do whatever you want with it. So to me, they are just two very different entities. They both serve very important roles in our society, but they operate very differently. So the final thing is, if transparency is important, how about we just all do it then? All of us do it. Or how about none of us do it? Now, my guess is the public would not be very happy if the legislature rescinds all of the rules that we have in making our meetings open to the public and even allowing our public to run for our board. So that was my message: is we operate differently. We take all of the students, and some of those students are very, very high needs. They're very important. And don't for one second think that I don't think they need to be, but we just serve two different roles. So hopefully I didn't ramble on too long.
I really appreciate, Rick. First of all, you made clear that you believe every kid who comes in your door deserves to be loved and educated. And there is nothing more unifying than that message. But I think especially at a time where access and accountability are big things we're talking about just in public services in general. what you hit in terms of who can access that education and how are those dollars accountable to the people who are funding it. Really important messages to make clear. We want more accountability, and then somehow this would be this would be passed at the same time that we want additional accountability. Is a really interesting, pretty different messages we're hearing. So thank you so much, Rick. I'm now going to introduce Sheila Peterson. Sheila's been a physical education teacher, an athletic coach, and at one time, I believe, a reading strategies educator at Wachter Middle School in Bismarck since 2010, and in 2024 was named Teacher of the Year. I want to share. It's one thing to share your bio. It's another to have other people say things about you. And one of Sheila's former students who said he considered Sheila to be the most impactful educator he has ever known, described her as being what teaching is all about. A colleague of Sheila's said, "I have no doubt that Sheila educates everyone she encounters, whether intentionally or not. She draws people in, makes them feel safe, heard, and understood, and guides them in whatever way she is able. Education is not solely her career. It is who she is as a person." And the fact that she's here today to educate us, not just as her experience as an educator, but Sheila went a little bit viral, if that's a thing we can describe, on social media when she shared the story about her experience as a mom. And sometimes we forget that a lot of our educators who are talking about the impacts of vouchers or ESAs are also parents themselves. So Sheila, if you could come off mute and share a little bit of the story you shared in front of the education committees, we would just be so grateful.
Yes, thank you for having me. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can.
Bubbles popping up. First of all, thank you so much. And thank you for all the kind words. I don't know if I always deserve those, but I appreciate it. Rick, you are the reason why kids go first in projects. I wish I was going first. So you wonderfully spoke for us, and I appreciate you and all your hard work. I'd also like to echo his statements about this isn't an attack on private education whatsoever. And I do appreciate parents' rights to have to educate their kids the way they want to. And I think that there's a reminder, there's a lot of different reasons why we have choice, but we also have a lot of choice available in our public school systems as well. So that's one thing I wanted to make sure that I was being very upfront about. When all of this came to action, I had the opportunity to be Teacher of the Year, and I struggle with imposter syndrome, and I still do. And so I got to be around a wonderful group of educators in a lot of states fighting for a lot of things that we didn't have to fight for in North Dakota. And I remember sitting in those spaces with those people being so grateful and proud of how we do things in North Dakota. And one of the things I've been so proud of is our fierce independence and protecting what we think is right for all of our kids. And so as I completed my Teacher of the Year, I thought to myself, what are my next steps? How do I continue to grow? Because you go from this amazing program to now you're done. And so I challenged myself, as I was challenged by my friends in the Teacher Year cohort, to be a better advocate. And so that was one of my goals for this year. And looking at these voucher bills, it was easy to find a project. And so a couple of things, a lot of the statistics show that people who do utilize the voucher systems come from, it's like 70%, I think, are families that can, for the most part, afford to pay for the schooling. And that the people that are typically used to hold up the bill, that they're going to use the voucher system, don't typically use those monies. I grew up in a pretty poor family, and so I would have been part of that low socioeconomic status category on the testing. And whether you gave me family $4,000 or $5,000 or $6,000, it wouldn't have mattered. That extra $1,000 we would have had to come up with would have been like coming up with $1 million. It just wouldn't have mattered. And so that was concerning to me about these bills, because I do feel that the quality of my public education I got in a presidential school of excellence in Rosemont, Minnesota, was a great equalizer. My husband and I have had many conversations about this. And we just talked about that education is supposed to be an opportunity, how do we say this? An opportunity for everybody to have the equal opportunity to succeed. And so we have to provide educational outcomes that give every child that equal opportunity to be successful. And so in my own personal experience with my daughter, that's where I got really fired up, because she would not be where she is today without the team that she has had around her. The public educators, all the different therapies that Rick mentioned I can't imagine how expensive my child has been to educate. But she went from a kid that had 1 to 2, 1 to 1.8 at a time in kindergarten to a kid who's on the B honor roll right now in high school, and she's about to get her driver's license. And when she was a kindergartner, I didn't see any of this for her in her future. I just didn't. However, and I can't take credit. Like I didn't teach my daughter how to tie her shoes, and I'm teacher of the year, so we should probably revoke that. My daughter learned at school. I tried so many times to try to teach her however I was teaching her, it wasn't working. One day she just came home. Somebody had taught her how to tie her shoes. The confidence, the things that were happening in her classroom. I also teach peer to peer, and one of her best friends commented on my testimony when she came over the other night to drop her off for track, and she's like, "You didn't mention the role of all the kids in that classroom and the role I've had in her life." So I do have to mention Abby real quick. But just the way that the educators taught every kid in that room, from the kid who learned the best to the kid that was the hardest. Do you know how many conferences I went to with my kid where the teacher said, "This happened, but I just love her"? Over and over and over and over. That's what I've heard every year of her education. And I just know that I think about the way that these monies are being spent. And I think it's ironic that some of the people introducing legislation for school vouchers were also introducing legislation to pay for lunches last session, and that we're not feeding our kids, right? I also find it interesting, like there's so many other ways we could be spending this money. What about if we had like early childhood education that was available for every kid in the state of North Dakota? Because we talk about the kids that don't come with the same resources when they come into kindergarten. What if we could equalize that for everybody? I think about the early childhood experience my daughter got to have in her elementary school because of her diagnosis that was not available to all kids just because the resources aren't there. But what if all kids could use that resource? And so I feel very disheartened as an educator because, like you talked about, these buckets and the buckets that we use for interventions for children. And, I was talking to one of my other friends who's a teacher of the year out of Minot, and she had just received a questionnaire for a young lady who was thinking about going, her family's thinking about utilizing that choice to go to private education. And some of the things in that questionnaire entailed, what's their behavior like? What's their academic abilities like? And so the thought that like when I tried to put my daughter into private preschool because she got kicked out of 3 in a month, I couldn't even get a phone call back. And so I do think that I support that parents have the choice, but I don't support that we're going to potentially take money out of the bucket that would help with interventions that students can't be accepted into these institutions. I have a problem with that as an educator. Overall, I'm here for what's best for kids. Right. And so I will fight for what's best for all kids. But I think that's the importance that everybody needs to take into account is this for all kids?
Thank you, Sheila. As you can tell, we are enormously lucky to have people like Sheila and Rick in North Dakota. When you think about the kind of impact, oftentimes life-changing, that educators have on the lives of not just their students, but also their colleagues and their communities. North Dakota is awfully lucky to have people like Sheila and Rick doing that here with our students, with our families, and with our communities, and want to thank them for taking time out of their day today. Before Amy, I don't know if we'll go to any questions or anything like that, but what I do want to make very clear, and was mentioned by both Sheila and Rick, without even trying to coordinate that message. North Dakotans for Public Schools is a coalition of North Dakotans who may not belong to any sort of membership organization. So maybe Sheila belongs to a teacher organization. Maybe Rick belongs to a superintendent or educational leader organization. But there are, what we have learned, North Dakotans across the board, rural and less rural communities, public school and private school and homeschool, who oppose this, who want to be engaged in this, folks who recognize the role that education has in our society, but also as an economic engine in our communities, and who want to be engaged in this debate. Our opposition to legislation that uses public funds for private schools is not against non-public education, as both of them said. Private schools are plenty good, and they're a great choice for some families to make if that is where they want to make that investment. But we don't believe it is our responsibility, the government's responsibility, me as a taxpayer, you as a taxpayer, to pick up the tab for that choice. So North Dakotans for Public Schools is a coalition of just regular people who oppose this type of legislation, who recognize the challenges this has created in multiple states. We are only a handful of states that is not providing public money for private schools. And we stand firm in our opposition to vouchers or ESAs. We don't feel like we can afford it. We recognize that there are still vast needs in our students in public schools that need to be served, that are very, very difficult to serve, but that our public schools are committed to serving. Consistently, vouchers and ESAs end up diverting limited resources away from public schools. The costs in other states start small and then balloon very quickly over time, creating challenges in states' budgets. Private schools don't have an obligation to serve all kids. In fact, I sat in a room where our administration discussed the inability to serve students who had applied and wanted to come to that private school. And they did not accept them because they didn't feel they could serve them. That just is not how public schools work. Private school tuition, there is no accountability. And oftentimes what other states have seen is they increase that tuition to the same amount that voucher or ESA program provides in state funding. So it really is a subsidy that is not needed. Choice has always existed in North Dakota. It's just that taxpayers have not had to fund it. And this would be the very first time that our state would make that choice. As I mentioned, the Senate passed the House bill, so we're coming further in those steps of the legislative process, and we are going to engage in every single step of that process. The folks who have joined North Dakotans for Public Schools have been emailing and contacting their legislators. That's what we're supposed to do. We are supposed to engage in this process. We also feel like we're not being heard, and I feel very strongly that the vast majority of North Dakotans do not support this policy, do not support providing these funds, and we will continue to oppose it. If the legislature opts to pass it, we will put pressure on Governor Armstrong to veto it. If the legislature passes it and Governor Armstrong chooses to sign it into law, we know there is an option to refer a piece of legislation that is passed by the legislature. A referral process, if you're at all familiar with an initiated measure process, is pretty similar. What we would do is put together a sponsoring committee. That committee would be responsible for collecting, with the support of a bunch of North Dakotans, because this wouldn't be easy, we would have to collect thousands of signatures over the course of a 90-day window. And if we do that, and those signatures are verified and confirmed by the Secretary of State's office that they're all valid, then that language that was passed by the legislature would go on the ballot of the next statewide election. That would be the primary election in 2026, so that the public can say, yeah, we do agree with what you did, or the public can say, no, we don't. That is not something we take lightly. It's hard work. It's expensive work. It is not how we want to go about this. And this is not something we're doing to threaten legislators to vote in the way that we believe they should vote. But this is the reality that we're in. So North Dakotans for Public Schools is ultimately about the long-term support for our public schools and holding accountable that we do not believe public money should be devoted to private education. So Amy, I will make sure that I throw in the chat, or if somebody already has, link to join North Dakotans for Public Schools. If you have not yet, you will be joining hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of others. To sign up, that means you will join North Dakotans for Public Schools. You don't have to pay anything to join. We may at some point have to be asking for contributions, but that's not what this is about right now. This is really about showing that the majority of North Dakotans do not support this policy, and we need you to be a part of that discussion.
Erin, Rick, and Sheila, thank you so much. And also, I can tell that you're very academic and astute, because we're right on agenda at the exact minute of our agenda. We've kind of come to the point in our agenda where we do have some question and answer time. And so there have been a few questions in the chat. I pulled them out as you all were speaking. I'm just going to read them out. And Erin, I'll let you take the lead or point them in whoever in the direction, but all three of you are welcome to join in. They're all different. Okay. So the first question I had was it says, what is the current inflationary increase for schools at the state legislature?
So the question about the inflationary increase. So as you probably know, the state contributes a portion of the dollars that fund our K through 12 schools across the state. Every year they try to add to accommodate for increases in costs, to accommodate for staffing, an increase of what that contribution from the state is. The governor and the House, when they the governor's budget proposed a 2% increase each year of the next biennium. That is what the House passed. The Senate did increase that inflationary increase to 3% each year. That bill is not yet passed through the whole process and has not gotten to the governor's desk yet. But what it does have right now is a 3% increase for each year of the biennium. Rick, is that correct? I want to make sure that I'm fact checking myself too.
Correct. Right now, it's I believe the Senate passed a 3% increase. The House is still at 2% increase. It'll go to the conference committee, and but
that's right.
Even a 2% increase with declining enrollment, but that's where we are. Yes.
Right. So now the bill will go to conference committee, and the 3 members of the House and 3 members of the Senate will work out those differences to make sure that the same bill passes each chamber. I've heard folks saying they maybe will compromise to 2.5 and 2.5. Again, that decision is being made, affecting how many students do we have in public school across the state? I think last estimate was 120,000 students. At the same time, they're also thinking about putting millions of dollars now into private schools.
Thank you. We had another question is, what are you hearing about federal funding coming down in parent vouchers? Have you heard anything about that?
There has been some discussion about the way federal funds are used to support K through 12 education. I certainly invite Rick or Sheila to jump in on this. The president has indicated he wants more flexibility in the way those dollars can be used. There already is quite a bit there is some flexibility in the way federal dollars are used to support education, but I believe he's indicated he wants those dollars to be used to support families being able to choose private education.
So when he wrote that, a lot of the things that he wrote would be good for school choice are things that schools are already doing.
Good point.
Did you guys, providing like career and technical education opportunities, centered learning, a lot of those things are already happening in our public school systems.
Mm-hmm.
I think almost the whole entire list, minus obviously if you were going to private schools due to your faith-based education, all that. Obviously, we don't do that in public education, but a lot of the things that he was suggesting we're already doing. And the other one that I was concerned about, and I do try to stay out of politics for many reasons, just because I don't want any of my families or kids to feel ever uncomfortable. And as a teacher, I don't know that our political affiliation should be super obvious for doing a good job, right? Mm-hmm. But I was wondering with all of that, maybe one of you guys could speak to this, with all of the ways that funding's being removed unexpectedly, if that's creating a little bit of fear. Right? Because there's been things going on right now where if you haven't used up all the grant money, some of the grant money is being pulled back before the budgeting season is over, if I'm understanding things correctly.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable conclusion to make. I think, even what I saw during my time at USDA, when commitments are made, when contracts are signed, when there is an assumption that you have an agreement with the government to receive funding, that funding will be there. And there have been areas where that is being pulled back and where there's a lot of concern about those impacts. All reason, again, seeing the big picture in this. And when I asked Sheila to join us, she made very clear, I don't ever want to be involved in partisan political discussions, in political discussions at all. But really, this is about a system that we have a responsibility to. The government is responsible for public schools. And we need to make sure that those resources are available to have the strongest, most successful. Can we improve? Absolutely. Every single person believes that we can always improve. But we need the resources to be able to do that and to serve the needs of all people who come through those doors.
Thank you, Erin. And we have time for one more question and we had a few others, but I'm going to close up with this question. And leading into the legislative session, there was a lot of polling and different things done, getting the general public's impression of vouchers and the different names that vouchers are called. And we did have a question that there was a legislative forum in District 24. The legislators are saying that they had received a survey or a poll that shows that more people in their district are in favor of education savings accounts. Can you speak to that, or do you know anything about where that may have come from?
I'm not familiar with that. Here's what I know. As somebody who's been involved in politics now for quite some time, you can get a result to say oftentimes whatever you want, depending on how you ask a question. if a question is asked, do you support school choice? Find me somebody who doesn't say yes. How we define that and what that means in terms of policy and funding that is attached to it, you will find very different results from North Dakotans. So again, I feel pretty confidently. I try really hard to make sure that my bubble is not so insulated that I only hear from the exact same people, or that I have confirmation bias, that I just want people to tell me what I want to hear. No matter how this is, whether it is in one-on-one conversations, in my own circle of friends, looking well beyond that with folks who I know that I have disagreed with a lot on a lot of issues. This is one that tends to unite North Dakotans in a way I have not seen of issues in a very long time. So I'm certain that as this moves forward, there will continue to be polling. Those polls should be done in a scientific way that reflects the makeup of North Dakota, that reflects the vastness in terms of geography and in the inputs they're getting, so that it properly reflects where North Dakotans are at.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to kind of wrap up our conversation today. Rick, Sheila, and Erin, honestly, thank you so much, not just for being here this morning, which was really important, but for all that you're doing to educate people on these bills and in your daily lives and serving the children and families of North Dakota. It's really, I was very delightful to hear from you today. And I just wanted to let you know, we did have 76 people who tuned in from across North Dakota. That was what we topped at. So it was a good one. That was a big draw for people. So again, thank you for their time, especially on a holiday weekend for so many.